This once classified footage that was leaked from DARPA and MIT shows the ability of our military and what their capabilities are when it comes to propulsion. These experiments were done and tested in 2004, around the same time as the Nimitz Tic Tac UFO incident, which I find interesting. But look how these vehicles can travel. And they actually perfected this. You got to remember, this is 2004, and it flies like a drone, perfectly static in the air, even better than a drone, well before drones even existed. Look how these things lock into space and move. I mean, it's incredible at any angle. So right here, they're attempting to do all kinds of weird angles. And you could see how the propulsion's working for it. And they end up perfecting this to a point where I can't even imagine where it's at today. It's interesting how it looks like a little UFO from behind shooting down a beam of light. Look how it just rotates like that. These devices, these were hunter killers meant to take out enemy rockets, used high-powered ultraviolet lasers. They can move in any direction, fire lasers that are completely invisible to the naked eye, and destroy any other targets. Now, notice how the jet engines are running on top, but almost nothing is coming out of the bottom. They actually have to have a jet shooting upwards to push it back down. Look how static this thing moves. Just like a UFO. In fact, I believe that they were attempting to mimic the Nimitz UFO or another one similar to that, seeing its design and trying to incorporate it using earthly materials. And this is what they came up with. Can completely rotate its body, shoot high-powered invisible lasers, take out any target anywhere. Absolutely incredible. Today, I want to introduce you to a theory that I call quantum UFOs. So to understand what I mean when I say quantum UFOs, first you have to understand quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is the study of the very small. So there's general relativity and quantum mechanics. These two theories do not coincide together. They don't work together. General relativity makes predictions like the Earth moving around the sun and large bodies like that. And quantum mechanics makes predictions of protons and neutrons circling around the nucleus of an atom. So it's the study of the very, very small. Let us start with the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles or little balls of matter act if we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen. We see a pattern on the back wall. Where they went through the slits, we see a single band created on the back wall. And the same effect happens if you were to pass waves through the single slit. You would see a single band on the wall. But what happens if you were to pass waves through two slits in the wall? The waves bounce off each other and create what's known as an interference pattern. Now, logic and deductive reasoning dictates that if we were to shoot tiny pieces of matter or little marbles through two slits, that we should see two bands, just like we see when we shoot little bits of matter through a single slit. But when we shoot these little bits of matter through the two slits, what do we get? An interference pattern. How is this possible? This is where the quantum world gets crazy. Now, physicists were completely baffled by this, so they assumed that the electrons must be bouncing off of each other to create the interference pattern. So they decided to create a machine that would shoot the electrons through the double slits, one electron at a time. But over a couple hours of doing this, the same interference pattern showed up. So, not wanting to be outdone by the universe, the physicists decided to create a device that could measure and tell you which slit each particle went through, either the left or the right. And when they reran the experiment, what was on the back wall? 2 bands, not an interference pattern. The simple act of observing which slit the photon or the electron went through caused it to turn back to a single band pattern and not an interference pattern. So what the hell was going on? At this point, the conclusion becomes inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potential, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to create the interference pattern that we see on the wall. But mathematically, it's even stranger because it goes through both slits and it goes through neither, and it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. This is what physicists refer to as superposition. That's when something is both up and down at the same time. It's both left and right at the same time. So these particles are actually particles and waves at the exact same time. But the most amazing thing was the fact that the particle acted like a wave until they put the measuring device in. Then it changed back to being a particle, as if it knew it was being watched. It was the observer who changed it. Once the particle is observed, it collapses the wave function, forcing it back into a particle. It's the observer that makes the difference. Now we're going to take a look at a clip of the actual experiment where the physicist is showing it off to a room full of kids, and notice what he does.
That you get with waves. Now we're going to try something a little different. We saw the pattern that light produced, nothing like the sound. But here we've got essentially the same piece of equipment as before, but we're going to turn the brightness of the light down. Here we have the source of light over here. And it's passing through 2 slits. We've had to cover this up because we don't want any light to get in.
Notice how he pauses for a second and realizes there is no way to explain to the children that it is them, the observer, that is making the difference. There's no way for their cute little minds to understand something so profound.
Understand is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web.
So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
Into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
That's what you said.
Some of those codes are showing on the screen behind you right now. They don't look like codes, but these pictures, which we call Adinkras, are graphical representations of sets of equations that are based on codes.
So that everybody is on the same page, what he is saying is that these images, these Adinkras, are graphical representations of quantum string theory, of the quantum universe that our universe is built on top of. And what I find incredibly fascinating is how much these images look like UFOs. So it makes me wonder if the graphical representations of quantum string theory of the quantum universe is actually embedded inside the design of UFOs, allowing them to traverse great distances across the universe because their design incorporates the quantum universe. And for any of our keen observers, notice how this certain Adinkra also makes the interference pattern that you see when performing the double slit experiment, which I just find absolutely fascinating, that the graphical representation of string theory happens to have a design in it that shows the interference pattern that lets us know the true nature of reality. A very fascinating piece. Let's look at some of the similarities between quantum mechanics and UFOs. Like, take for instance quarks, which are tiny, tiny points inside the nucleus of an atom, at the very smallest of the small. They apparently pop in and out of existence, seemingly from nowhere. And UFOs also seemingly pop in and out of existence from nowhere. Another point, that in the quantum world, an object can be in two places at the same time. The same object can be in several different locations. It's not several different objects, it's the same object in several different locations. And with a number of UFO sightings and UFO videos, you'll see multiple lights pop up all over the place. And it could be that these multiple lights are actually just one light. And it's a quantum effect that allows us to see it in multiple places, but it is in fact the same UFO. Now let's consider another famous experiment performed by physicists, the double quantum eraser experiment, which is basically the double slit experiment, but performed with quantum entanglement, using entangled particles. So, performing this experiment with entangled particles shows that once a particle is observed, its entangled partner will change retroactively to fit whatever the observation was. So if you observe the particle spinning upwards, then the quantum, its quantum partner would retroactively turn to a downward spin, the complete opposite, which actually happens back in time because the first quantum entangled partner gets measured first and then retroactively goes backwards in time and its partner will change. So I like to compare this with the phenomenon of missing time, where a person is driving, they look at the clock, they look up, they look at the clock, it says 12 o'clock, they look up in the sky, see a UFO, look back down, it says 3 o'clock, yet they're in the exact same place they were driving, and 3 hours have just passed. So all of a sudden there's just this time dilation, this time loop that just comes up missing because it can go retroactively back in time and change itself. What about when UFOs are seen to teleport from one area to another, where they disappear and reappear instantly at a far distance away? The same thing happens in the quantum universe. It's called quantum non-locality, where an object can disappear in one spot and appear in a completely different spot, seemingly from nowhere. But it is in fact the same exact object. So basically they teleport around just like a UFO seems to teleport around. And this may be the reason why it's so hard for scientists to actually study UFOs, because of like quantum mechanics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which states that you can't ever know exactly where something is if you want to know how fast it's going, or you can never know how fast something's going if you want to know exactly where it is. There's always going to be an uncertainty factor there, and that's why we are always uncertain about UFOs, because we just don't have the ability to study them in depth like we do in general relativity. Now let's consider this. What if UFOs are flying around in superposition? So they are both a particle and a wave at the exact same time, and it takes somebody to observe it for the wave function to collapse, focusing it back down into a particle, into an actual machine that can be observed by a human or be recorded by one of our devices. So simply by having to look in the right place at the right time, the wave function collapses around the UFO and brings it into focus. A solid object is now there, it now exists. But when you weren't looking at it, it wasn't there. It was traveling through the quantum universe to go wherever the fuck it needed to go, or do whatever the hell it needed to do. But it takes an observer to see it, to collapse the wave function, bringing it into focus and into our reality. Alright, so what's your guys' opinion on quantum ufology? Tell me what you think. Don't forget, support me on Patreon, buy some UFO proof, donate to my PayPal, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys next time. UFO proof out.